Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. Right now in downtown Toronto, the one-day North by Northeast Talks conference is going on this afternoon at the Great Hall, which we're just next to, and an excellent panel just wrapped up on safer spaces at music venues in Toronto and around Canada. Not only safer spaces, but just addressing the problem of sexual violence and sexual misconduct in the live music industry. A very illuminating part of this conversation, Viktoria Belle, right here next to me, the founder of the Dandelion Initiative that is focused on training staff and management security at live music venues and other establishments on how to identify, prevent, and I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Deal with. There you go. Sexual misconduct in these establishments. But Viktoria, I really enjoyed the chat, particularly your part of the chat in there. But just to, I guess, set some context, you just want to explain a bit of the history of the Dandelion Initiative and do a better job than I can of explaining what it is that you guys are doing.
For sure. So I started the Dandelion Initiative in 2015. I've been a musician in the city of Toronto and played everywhere in Ontario, and also worked in the bar and service industry here as a bartender for over 10 years. And after becoming a survivor myself, I started seeing these illuminating gaps and started seeing the real hypocrisy of people saying that they're a safe space or a safer venue or a good promoter or a good band, and yet they're perpetuating or hiding these acts of violence that are happening so frequently. And they can be really minor or they can be really major, but there was very little accountability. So I started this training program called the Safer Bars and Safer Spaces Training, and it's really about teaching folks who are employees how to protect themselves, how to intervene if they see something that isn't okay, how to make an environment safer and more welcoming for all people so that we have equitable, safer spaces. And then it's also about holding management and bar owners and venue owners and festival organizers accountable by teaching them how to build policies that are preventative, that have measures for disclosure and follow-up and what that looks like, and also how to respond to the public when they've called them out and said, something horrible happened here, you need to be accountable to us.
There's probably no way of quantifying it, but just to give even anecdotally, just how prevalent is this issue? Whether we're talking about something as serious and abhorrent as rape, or whether it's just something verbal, inappropriate comments, an unwanted, hand on the shoulder, that kind of stuff. Just how common is it, particularly for women, but for, LGBTQ people, for trans people, it's certainly less common, but it can happen to men too. Just how, like I said, I don't know if there's a way of quantifying it, but how prevalent is this issue?
I mean, if we look at statistics, 1 in 6 men, 1 in 4 women, and we don't have stats for non-binary and trans folks because it's not a safer even system for those community members to navigate in. So it's very pervasive, it's very prevalent, but the more concerning thing is how normalized it is. So if we look at the huge spectrum, rape and sexual assault is normalized. We cover it up. We make excuses for people. We say, oh, there's no way that Stevie could have done that. He's such a nice guy. Yeah. Or I've played with that band so many times, there's no way that they could have done that. And that's a normal reaction. It's a normal reaction to something gruesome and something horrible that's happening in our communities. But it's not a solution. Yeah. It's, again, what we've been conditioned. How we've been conditioned a response is to say, I don't believe you, or that couldn't have happened. Yeah. And it does. There's 553,000 sexual assaults that are reported in Canada a year. Only 3 out of those 1,000 lead to conviction. So those 997 assailants or perpetrators are walking into your bars, are playing your shows. Maybe they're comrades or colleagues. And so it's really about identifying how we can stop this perpetuation and then working as a community to hold each other accountable. For example, if you know that someone's done something wrong, taken advantage of someone, coerced someone, have a conversation about it. It's that simple. It starts with calling it out, having a conversation. Not publicly, not on the internet, but just face to face with someone. And I think we're just taught, especially in the live music scene, to play certain roles, to fit into those roles, and that being quiet and being appeasing is better. And that's not the case. That's not the case.
Like you mentioned, you're a musician, you're in the band Meanwood. Something you said during the panel was very illuminating, which is when you were talking about the reaction to when you were calling out people, specific people,
Yes.
That you knew of in the Toronto music scene for the shit that they had done.
Sure.
The reaction that you got within the industry and from trolls online and that kind of stuff. Could you just, for folks watching or listening, just expand on that? Because I found that sadly not surprising, but still shocking to hear.
Of course. So, I mean, like anytime that you're doing any sort of activism or community work, I mean, people aren't going to like you because you are a shit disturber. You are talking about things that make people uncomfortable. But unfortunately, I think the hardest lesson for me doing this work and trying to get venues to get this training and trying to teach people that I'm just trying to help create some sort of accountability measure for the people up top, so that the people down below aren't the ones that are suffering and struggling and trying to create these safer spaces without any tools. And the response that I've gotten is a lot of backlash. My band, has been incredibly supportive of me doing this work, knowing that it would cast a dark shadow on Meanwood and that it would be more challenging for us to play shows in certain venues. And that is the sad reality of the punishment that we receive when we try to talk about this. So imagine if we're already being punished for talking about it, just trying to strategize and build new policies and new safety plans. If we're already being punished and told that, you're a bitch or you deserve to be raped or harmed. These are things that people say. We can only imagine how unsafe it is in the ground, on that ground level. And so it's harrowing, but it's also incredibly empowering and shows me even more how important this work is and how important this training is,
And you were saying that your band even got blacklisted from venues in Toronto by the people you called out or by friends of theirs or both?
It's complex and we talk about, the things that I want to say and the things that I'm able to say. And I think that harm happens, and sometimes people have good intentions and they just don't do the right thing. And so some of the folks that may be hesitant to have us play, or some of the folks that maybe don't want me around their venues, are in a state of misunderstanding. And I invite those people to have a conversation with me and see that I'm not here to punish anybody, that I'm just trying my best to create a safer space for all of us, right?
Could you explain a bit more about the actual training you do with both who within the venue establishment it is that you want and need at these training, and the key points that you're trying to address with your training?
Yeah, so what we do is it's 3 hours, and it's 3 hours, anybody will tell you, is 2 hours really. And we go in person. It's myself and usually a couple of other facilitators, all self-identifying survivors and members of our community. And we start by simply talking about what is rape culture? Why is it so pervasive in the creative arts? And we start to dismantle that, start talking about gender stereotypes and enthusiastic consent and bystander intervention and accountability. And then sometimes we get into really deep conversations about our own experiences. And it helps people to be able to talk about it and come up with strategies. So we really focus on that with the team. But what we really want is upper management, bar owners, festival organizers to be there so that when we move into the second part of the training, which is policy development, we can look to those people and say, you've heard what your staff is dealing with. You know the climate that we're working in. So what are you going to do? You have the power to create different policies, different protocols, give people different tools. You have that power. So what are you going to do to be accountable? And unfortunately, what we found is very few times have owners, managers, organizers actually been at the training.
And they're the ones that most need it.
Absolutely.
The ratio of people, of venues that have signed up for your training to those that have completed it, is discouraging.
Yes.
It sounds.
Yeah.
What are the exact numbers again?
Yeah, so 36 bars and venues signed up and 4 have done the training in the last year.
And you say of those four,
two have passed. We don't really do a pass and fail. Okay. So if you go on our website, dandelioninitiative.ca, and you click on the Safer Bars listing, you'll see all the bars that have done the training. And we simply say, completed the training, which just is the bare essentials. Yeah. Followed up, which means that we had a really awesome conversation. We're building proactive tools. We're there to support them. And then instituted some sort of change. And out of the 4 bars, 2 have done that.
So in that case, how bad is the issue of essentially wallpapering?
Yeah.
Venues, festivals, wanting to look like they're taking the issue seriously while not wanting to actually put in the work or the sacrifice?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think a lot of people think when we talk about sexual violence or about eradicating gender-based violence that it can only happen if we're punishing people. That if we're going into this space and calling them out and holding them accountable or watching them, people have this idea that it comes from malicious, but it comes from a place of humility and dignity. That I've experienced violence in these spaces, therefore I understand how pervasive it is. Therefore I've created tools to change that. Therefore you should be willing to hear me and work with me. And maybe it's the misunderstanding of what this training really is, which is just to teach you how to be more accountable and to be safer. That's it. Policy building is really empowering and really powerful. And I'm a little bit confused as to why people in power don't want to do it.
Is it? They don't want to, like I said, just to return to the idea of wallpapering, where they clearly want to look like they're taking the issue seriously. So is it just lies? They're just being disingenuous? Do you think that there's any sincerity there, but then they're just like, oh, it seems like a hassle? Like, what do you think the core of that, wanting to look like you're doing something while not actually doing something? You know what I mean?
I think it's multiple things. I think it's like, who wants to sit for 3 hours and talk about sexual assault? Like, no one. But that's not what we're doing. We're not going in there for 3 hours and talking about sexual assault. We're talking about all of the preventative, the smart, the simple solutions to keeping folks safe. And, you know, I always try to answer with humility and meet people where they're at and say, maybe it's just that they don't know how. Maybe they feel scared. Maybe they don't want to be punished or held accountable. And to that, I just say, too fucking bad. Too bad. I mean, you're putting on shows, you're having bands play here, you know. Some of these people are as young as 18, 19, 20 years old. You're knowingly putting them in dangerous situations with no accountability, and that's just not okay anymore. Right?
Is it, since you do the solutions rest with the venue owners, the festival, you know, the festival organizers, the people at the very top, essentially is a trickle-down effect that the solution has to follow? Absolutely.
I mean, if we look at anything in society that is disproportional, that isn't equitable, that isn't honorable, like our election. You know, if we had proper proportional representation, if we had a system that was equitable and that honored what our values really were, Doug Ford wouldn't be our premier. But that's not the case. Much like in the live music industry and in the bar and service industry, we have systems that have been in place forever. And people are very comfortable in their positions of power. And that's okay. But it can't continue that way. And what we're trying to say is you have the power, you have the privilege, so use it for good. That's all. That's all we're asking you to do. Demanding that someone who is in a precarious work situation, whose livelihood depends on their tips, whose band depends on them being able to perform, it's not fair to expect them to be the ones who are proactively creating the change. Of course they play a part. Of course every individual has a responsibility. Of course. But systemically or systematically, it is the people at the top that need to create that trickle effect and set that example that this is a zero tolerance zone.
Within that, what role do artists play? Because they can both potentially be the victim, but they also hold a position of certainly of influence and power within the live music equation. But at the same time, they're not at the top of the hierarchy, at least when it comes to you know the money and whatnot. So yeah, just generally speaking, what role do artists have in this system, this equation?
Yeah. I mean, I can say in general, artists have a great responsibility, especially when performing, to ensure that their space is safer. Yet art is subjective, so what is safe to some may not be safe to all. What is acceptable to some at a certain space may not be acceptable to all. So it's very challenging to kind of put strongholds on artistry in general. However, does your artistry include sexual violence? Does your artistry include oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, on and on? I don't think that's artistry. I think that's an abuse of power and privilege. So I think artists have the responsibility to remain artists and to be dignified and walk through and create safer spaces and touch people with their art and their music. Ultimately, I think that it's more of a community responsibility, where if we know that someone in our community is perpetrating harm, we need to call that person in and hold them accountable. That's our duty as artists, is to be mindful of who's coming to our shows and the responsibility that we have to them. For example, at shows, if I see something that's not okay, I'll stop. I'll stop the set. I'll ask that person to leave. I'll call them out. Or I like to, start a show by saying that I hope that this is a safer space for people. If they're having issues, these are the exits, these are the people to talk to, or wait for the band to get off stage and we'll be glad to talk to you.
Is there actionable ways that artists can help set essentially the proper culture at their gigs? Particularly once artists start becoming a bit bigger, they start drawing bigger audiences, they carry more sway, both with their audiences, but also with bookers and agents and venue owners. A newer band that's drawing 20 people isn't going to have that much sway with the venue owner, unfortunately. But if a band that's selling out the place is like, hey, here's the parameters that we need, how can artists use that sway?
Yeah, we have a lot of power to be proactive. So for example, if you're an established band and you're playing at a venue that has had a history of some indiscretions or violence, why not before playing send an email and say, these are our safer policies that we like at our shows. We're going to require that this venue adopts those if they want us to play. The same for disclosure and follow-up. If you're playing at a festival and that there's going to be 100 plus people in the crowd, you don't have that vantage point of being able to see everyone. Who do you talk to before you get on that stage? And it's just about being mindful. It's being mindful about your privilege of being on stage, potentially being safer than the people in the crowd.
What does progress look like in this? Because again, it's not something that you could really quantify unless you have immense resources, do a very thorough study, but that's
totally.
So how can we identify progress? What are signposts along the way that we can know if we even are along the right path?
Yeah. We're having this conversation. That's the right path. People using their positions to get this kind of information out is the path. Having these panel discussions where people come and listen, that's the path. Going and doing this training, even if it's to just a few places, it's the path. Everybody is working as hard as they can, and some people aren't working at all. So it's about identifying those people and holding them accountable. And I think that progress looks like setting up our own rules because we know the systems are going to fail us, and holding each other accountable with dignity and humility. That's it. Not everything has to be an awkward, shitty, strenuous conversation. Sometimes it can just be about transparency and honesty.
Speaking of awkward conversations, you did this training yesterday with North by. Mm-hmm. We were just taking part of the North by panel. Seems to be a festival that's trying to, again, have the image of it. But how did that? I kind of know the answer to this already. But how did the training go yesterday?
So this has happened not just with North by. It's happened with a lot of folks, and I think it's maybe a part of my responsibility to be a little bit more clear before going into the training about who should be there and who needs to be there. But yesterday, we trained a small group of volunteers, and these are young kids. They're precarious workers. A lot of them were really triggered and by this content, right? They didn't even know what was going on. They didn't even know that this training was really happening. And there were no upper management. There's no organizers there. And the organizers at North by are exceptional people that are good intentioned. And North by has a lot of people working for it that are good intentioned. But was that the Dandelion Initiative's training? Like, no. Our training is meant to hold people accountable in a healthy and safe way. You can't do that if it's just the people on the bottom that are precarious and there just as volunteers. It doesn't work. So, yes, it was awesome that North by asked us to do it, but it wasn't what this training is supposed to do. The outcome is supposed to be to hold those accountable that have that privilege and power.
So, for those, whether they're victims of sexual violence and assault, whether they're venue owners, whether they're people that want to get involved in the training, essentially just where can people find out more about the Dandelion Initiative and how can they contact you?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Multiple ways. So first off, we're a brand new nonprofit. I did this grassroots for so long. So we don't have funding. We don't have any supports. So I apologize to people contacting me from London and Kingston. One day we will be able to do training there. Unfortunately, we don't have the means now, but for folks in Toronto and the surrounding GTA, dandelioninitiative.ca is our website. And also facebook.com/Dandelion Initiative is our Facebook. You can message us there, and through Instagram as well.
And just to tack on there, because all your work right now, like you're saying, is in Toronto. Do you have any sense of, is Toronto better, worse, the same than the other, cities and music hubs in Canada? It goes without saying that this is a pervasive problem that is going to be across the country.
Yeah.
But essentially, is there progress being made in some, is progress regional, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think Toronto is such a wild and complex city. It really is. It's so siloed in so many ways. But what I'm seeing is a true attempt at unification and a true attempt at trying to dismantle this normalizing violence. I feel it, I see it, even though there's a lot of shit, I see a lot of the good. And I'm really proud of our community here and how hard they're trying. And I hope that people keep trying and keep trying to get the training, and I won't stop. So, I think Toronto's a really special place that has a lot of opportunity to be a leader in creating safer spaces.
Viktoria, thanks a lot for doing this.
So much.
Cheers.
Thanks.